comment. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez made a comment about 6 months ago. She equated the detention camps down at the border of Texas with the concentration camps in Europe during World War II. You want to comment on that?
Yeah. So when I was at the Stand With ICE rally in Tacoma, Washington, we were graced by the presence of a man who was brought to this country as a refugee. He was Jewish, and his grandfather had escaped Nazi Germany, and he was disgusted by this kind of rhetoric from the likes of Alexandria Open Bordez, right? But that's all part of the tactic of the likes of the SPLC to tar and feather not only the patriotic men and women who work at ICE, who work at the Border Patrol, but also to apply this false narrative that we are treating so poorly, as if it was some sort of human rights violation, people who are being detained because they don't belong here. And what is the aim? What is the target? It's throwing a wrench into this vital function of interior enforcement. And Jessica read the passage where I said that walls and borders are not enough. We could have 2,000 miles of steel fortified walls, 18 feet high, along every part of the border. We'd still have an invasion problem. What is it? 40% of the people who are here illegally overstayed their visas. And if we tie the hands behind the backs of every ICE agent and deportation and removal employee and put gags on the mouths of local police and state troopers so that they cannot cooperate with each other to detect and to detain and deport people who don't belong here, it's absolute chaos. And that is the intention of the open borders left and right, is to create chaos and anarchy. What it does is it demonizes every single person who works at DHS who has that kind of function. And so that's why we've got these concerted doxing campaigns, harassment, bullying, and violence by the likes of Antifa and Abolish ICE. Every single employee, 20,000 of them, has been targeted. There are online dossiers now, and that's why I've called on people, good people who are brave enough and committed enough to stand with me at these rallies or organize them themselves, and that's what we're doing in Boston tomorrow, Saturday, 10 to 11 a.m. at the Burlington facility. Can I get a show of hands of everyone who's going to come? You know, if you can come, please come. I think it's important to exercise this muscle of civic engagement, and I try to practice what I preach. I've told people every single rally that I've gone to, and I understand a lot of people can't do it, but we've had people, veterans in wheelchairs that came out, moms with their children, even though they were warned not to come. And that's very heartening and encouraging to me, because if we're going to tell people, hey, we want you to show up at the polls next November, it's really important.
Folks, just so, because you're not mic'd up, please stand up and speak real loud with your question.
And then we'll repeat the questions
as
well. So we're doing that tomorrow at the Burlington Center, and you know, I'm telling people I don't have to be there. And I think it's very appropriate the Sunday before the Thanksgiving holiday to express our gratitude to these men and women. It's not done often enough, and I largely felt that I needed to take it upon myself to do it. I mean, Jorge Ramos calls himself an activist journalist, and he gets to sit as a moderator at a presidential debate, right? Why can't I be an activist journalist too? I call myself a community organizer for America.
While you were speaking, I received a rather obnoxious message from one of my colleagues, and he says in part, "So you went to the Michelle Malkin event tonight. I hope the media don't catch you when you walk out of Lou's house." To which I respond, as the vice chair and founder of the Massachusetts Republican Jewish Committee, we are very grateful and full of admiration that despite the obstacles, you have graced us with your presence here tonight, and thank you for that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. context, and that's what we're up against.
Yes,
And
yes.
so it matters that each of you took the time to come out. I'm sorry,
Mhm.
it's been hard the last couple of weeks.
Yes, yes.
And it's not just me, because I can take it. It's my family.
We support you wholeheartedly.
Yes.
Now, I've never understood why with computers, they can't see that the people that come in with visas don't come out. It seems so simple.
Yes. So let's talk about that. And the Center for Immigration Studies has been at the forefront of highlighting the need for a fully functional, thank you. Oh man, this is so authentic. Like, yeah. For a fully functional biometric entry-exit system. And after the 9/11 terrorist attacks, we got all of these promises from both parties that this was going to happen because we understood the dire consequences of not being able to track down student visa overstayers, like the many, I think five out of the 19 were visa overstayers. Now we have a problem where there are upwards of 700,000 visa overstayers wandering around out there, and we have no idea whether they're otherwise law-abiding, right? That phrase. Hi, Geraldo Rivera, right? Or whether they're
Jose Vargas.
or, and Jose Antonio Vargas. Yes, they have the same playbook. But whether,
Geraldo Rivera?
yes, has
Oh,
said
yeah.
the same thing, otherwise law-abiding.
Oh, I
Yeah.
thought you meant he was.
No. He uses that phrase, otherwise law-abiding. But whether they're here for good or for evil. And again, you can't just lay this at the blame of Democrats.
Right.
Republicans, not too long ago, had the White House, the Senate, and the House.
Thank you.
And they didn't put it into
That's
place.
right.
Now, so President Trump's administration has gone where with it? On the
They've
exit
done some
part.
more pilot programs.
Yay! Yeah.
Sir.
I often travel quite a bit.
Stand up and
Speak up.
Yeah, and project.
Often travel quite a bit, and you go through America, and every city's crowded, and every city has just enormous number of foreign-speaking people. So 7 to 11 million, which is a number that you often hear about illegals, seems to me to be ridiculous. What do you think the real number of illegal immigrants are?
So I'll talk about what I put in my book, and then I'll have Jessica update, because, Center for Immigration Studies is just the #1 resource on all of the facts, and facts don't care about our feelings about open borders, and of course, the Center for Immigration Studies has also been in the crosshair, labeled a hate group, just like I've been labeled a hate monger, but the truth speaks for itself. And I've got a little section at the front of the book called Open Borders by the Numbers. And of course that 7 to 11, 11 to 13 number has been used endlessly. It's sort of like this copy-paste thing that the mainstream media uses for the last 20 years.
We got that many in Dorchester.
He said we got that many in Dorchester. Those were
He said Dorchester.
Dorchester. I haven't been here long enough.
Dorchester.
So that was Pew Research figures from whatever, 2 decades ago. And then it was Princeton University researchers who updated it, and it's at 22 million now, or between 22 and upwards of 30 million is essentially what I say. So Center for Immigration Studies.
Yes, well, a colleague of mine, Steve Camerata, is our numbers person, and he's now looking into some of the Census Bureau data and finding that even the Census Bureau data does not completely agree. Conveniently, most of these other research organizations pick the survey of the census that produces a lower number of presumed illegal aliens in our population. To be fair, it's really hard to tell because we're not even going to be allowed to ask people if they're citizens in the census. much less what their immigration status is. So what we do is we try to identify them based on, we try to make proxies and make guesses about how many people. We also know that a lot of illegal aliens do answer the census because there's this network of government agencies and nonprofits whose grants and money that comes from the federal government is based on the number of people that they count. So they really try to push people to fill out their census forms. But we add in over, we think that there's an undercount of people here illegally and try to estimate. We don't find that it's probably as high as 20 million. One of the reasons that it might be lower than a lot of people think is because you would be surprised how many people are able to launder their status from being here illegally to a legal status, either through, for example, marriage to a U.S. citizen, or some kind of amnesty that takes place, and all kinds of other ways.
Adjustment
So, right,
is the bureaucratic
adjustment.
term, the 245I program.
Right, cancellation of removal,
Yes.
stays of deportation, all kinds of other ways that take people out of the, it doesn't really take them out of the illegal population.
Right.
But it causes them to not be counted as here illegally.
Interesting.
People with DACA.
Yeah.
So they don't have a legal status, but they're not necessarily counted as part of the illegal population either. So that's why there's a lot of softness in these numbers. Henry?
I have a question. I don't want your answer to have to be excruciating long, but could you just go through the arc of this separation of families? Remember, there was a big deal where these asylum seekers, they were separating their children from the parents. And then I thought there was a change in doing it now, or they're keeping the families together by shortening the period that they're in detention. I was just wondering if you could cover
Now, I'll
that.
give a short summary and then I'll have Jessica fine tune it, because it is arcane how this all came about. There was a lawsuit in Southern California by an unaccompanied minor who had been detained. And the lawsuit related to the conditions of the center. And there was a settlement that was reached between the INS and Doris Meisner under the Clinton administration, and a federal judge who is still there overseeing this settlement called the Flores Settlement, Dolly G. And so it evolved from dictating the conditions of what the facilities offered to unaccompanied minors into how many days they were allowed to stay there unaccompanied before they were released. And over time, the interpretation of the settlement determined a certain number, was it 20 days?
20 days.
20 days before the minor would be released into either foster care or into the custody of a relative, likely here illegally as well, I believe. And then
Fellow gang
member, trafficker, and so what was happening was that the separation of families was actually the policy. And then there was this manufactured outrage when people started paying attention to it under the Trump administration. And so the White House and the good people, people on the sovereignty side in the West Wing finally realized that to shut off this huge magnet that was inducing illegal alien parents to pay smugglers and coyotes to bring either legitimate minors or people posing as minors into the country, because they knew if they made it across the border that they'd be immediately turned out, that they finally did something to shut that racket down, because it was not something that was ever legislated. It was an interpretation by a liberal judge who was in cahoots with the ACLU, which brought the lawsuit in the first place. What was that?
That's right, and the so-called family separation policy that was in place, 18 months ago, came up. family separation was not the policy. Well, the policy was zero tolerance for illegal entry, and that they would be prosecuted for crossing the border illegally because it is a crime, and there are criminal penalties for it, which have not often been applied. But when you detain someone for a crime, you don't detain their children with them, so they went into this other foster care system that's run by the Department of Health and Human Services. Despite the fact that you're hearing about this policy as if it's still in effect at, say, the Democratic debate, or anytime a Democratic candidate is asked about immigration policy, the first thing they say is no more family separation. It's not. It's not being applied in the way that it was last year. However, something like 30% of all of the family apprehensions that are occurring at the border are cases where the child is not actually related to the person who has brought them over and claimed that they are the parent. This was something else that came out at that hearing last week. So they are separating cases of kids not related to the parents. They're also not allowing parents who have a criminal record to be released with their kid. And so, yes, separations are still taking place for good reason, for the protection of the child.
Exactly. And there are some incredible stories that I share in the book about some of these smuggling rackets that have been induced by this policy that was engendered by so-called compassionate open borders liberals, where individual children have been recycled by smugglers and just like sort of shared around. Well, this one will get this one across, and then we'll use them again and again and again. And there's another false narrative that I busted, where I talked about many of those HHS-funded facilities. There's one in Northern California, and so you've got this dire view of Alexandria, talking about kids in cages as if it's a concentration camp from World War II, and I talk about all of the amenities that are actually available to these unaccompanied minors, including Xboxes, anger management classes, yoga, but of course I'll be,
Free refills,
yeah, the whole,
movie nights, field trips,
psychotherapy, and of course, many of the ICE detention facilities, which are also being targeted. I toured the Aurora ICE facility. This is the facility where, in July, the Antifa thugs trespassed onto the property, yanked down the American flag, replaced it with a Mexican flag and a defaced Blue Lives Matter flag, and talked about it as if it was Gitmo. Inside, there's actually telepsychiatry booths. There's free LexisNexis terminals and a full-service pharmacy. My crappy Obamacare style plan, I have individual health care in Colorado, and it's been canceled 4 times. Doesn't cover my kids' dental insurance, but illegal aliens can get, toe fungus cream.
Lou's got a question.
Yes.